And while you are bankrupt, quote unquote, along with the rest of the country. Federal Reserve notes are unsigned checks written on a closed account. And FRNs are an inflatable paper currency designed to create debt through inflation and parenthesized devaluation of currency. And whenever there is an increase in the supply of money substitute in the economy, without a corresponding increase in the gold and silver backing, inflation occurs. And inflation is an invisible form of taxation that irresponsible governments inflict upon their citizens. And the Federal Reserve Bank, who controls the supply and movement of FRNs, has everybody fooled. And they have access to an unlimited supply of FRNs, paying only for the printing cost of what they need. And FRNs are nothing more than promissory notes for the U.S. Treasury securities, quote unquote, T-bills, a promise to pay the debt to the Federal Reserve Bank. And there is a fundamental difference between paying, quote unquote, and discharging, quote unquote, a debt. And to pay a debt, you must pay with value or substance, i.e. gold, silver, barter, or a commodity. And with FRNs, you can only discharge a debt. You cannot pay a debt with a debt currency system. And you cannot service a debt with a currency that has no backing in value or in substance. And no contract in common law is valid unless it involves an exchange of good and valuable consideration, quote unquote. An unpayable debt transfers power and control to the sovereign power structure that has no interest in money, law, equity, or injustice, because they have so much wealth already. And their lust is for power and control. And since the inception of central banking, they have controlled the fate of nations. The Federal Reserve System is based on the quote-unquote canon law and the principles of sovereignty protected in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. In fact, the international bankers used a quote-unquote canon law trust as their model, and adding stock and naming it a quote-unquote joint stock trust. The United States Congress had passed a law making it illegal for any legal, quote-unquote, person to duplicate a joint stock trust, quote-unquote, in 1873. And the Federal Reserve Act was legislated post facto to 1870, although post facto laws are strictly forbidden by the Constitution, which is Article 1, 9, Clause 3. And the Federal Reserve System is a sovereign power structure, separate and distinct from the federal United States government. And the Federal Reserve is a maritime lender and or maritime insurance underwriter to the federal United States, operating exclusively under Admiralty maritime law. And the lender or underwriter bears the risks, and the maritime law compelling specific performance in paying the interest or premiums are the same. And assets of the debtor can also be hypothecated to pledge something as a surety without taking possession of it, as surety by the lender or underwriter. And the Federal Reserve Act stipulated that the interest on the debt was to be paid in gold. Now, there was no stipulation in the Federal Reserve Act for ever paying the principal. And prior to 1913, pay attention to this date, prior to 1913, most Americans owned clear allodial title to property, free and clear of any liens or mortgages until the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. I'm continuing. Hold on. These are pages out of sequence. And so they hypothecated all property within the United States to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, in which the trustees or stockholders held legal title. legal title but not lawful title. Keep that in mind. The United States citizens listed as tenants and franchisee was registered as a beneficiary, quote unquote, of the trust via his or her birth certificate. And in 1933, the Federal United States hypothecated all of the present and future properties, assets, and their labor of their quote unquote subjects, the 14th Amendment U.S. citizen, to the Federal Reserve System. And in return, the Federal Reserve agreed to extend the Federal United States Corporation all the credit money substitute it needed, quote unquote. And like any other debtor, the Federal United States government had to assign collateral and security to their creditors as a condition of the loan. And since the Federal United States didn't have any assets, they assigned the private property of their economic slaves, the U.S. citizens, as collateral against the unpayable federal debt. And they also pledged the unincorporated federal territories, national parks, the forests, birth certificates, and non-profit organizations as collateral against the federal debt. And all has been transferred as payment to the international bankers. And unwittingly, America has returned to its pre-American Revolution feudal roots, whereby all land is held by a sovereign and the common people had no rights to hold the lodial title to property. And once again, we the people are tenants and sharecroppers renting our own property from a sovereign in the guise of the Federal Reserve Bank. And we the people have exchanged one master for another. And this has been going on for over 80 years without the informed knowledge, quote unquote, of the American people, and without a voice protesting loud enough. And now it's easy to grasp why America is fundamentally bankrupt. And why don't more people own their properties outright? Why are 90% of Americans mortgaged to the hilt and have little or no assets after all debts and liabilities have been paid? And why does it feel like you are working harder and harder and getting less and less? And we are reaping what has been sown. And the result of our harvest is a painful bankruptcy and a foreclosure on American property, precious liberties, and way of life. And few of our elected representatives in Washington, D.C. have dared to tell the truth. And the Federal United States is bankrupt. And our children will inherit this unpayable debt and the tyranny to enforce paying it. And America has become completely bankrupt in world leadership, completely bankrupt in financial credit, and completely bankrupt in its reputation for courage, vision, and human rights. And this is an undeclared economic war, bankruptcy, and economic slavery of the most corrupt order. Wake up, America. Take your country. Take your back to the country. Now, the culpable actions and activities revealed and exposed by Representative James Traficant in his speech that ends with the word country. And this is a statement after the fact. And the culpable actions and activities revealed and exposed by Representative James Traficant in his speech before the House of Representatives gives proof to the treasonous acts of sitting politicians. And party affiliations are irrelevant. And the common thread that is weaved throughout both monopolized political parties, Republican or Democrat, leaves no doubt as to their predetermined, pre-existing, and integrity compromised agendas. And they did this, what, in 1913? When was the Moorish Holy Temple of Science established?
1913.
Old Canaanland Temple is a counter move. It's dealing with the politics of the world. And thus Noble Drew Ali said what? The 14th and 15th Amendments not necessary for the salvation of my people and citizens and the divine warning to the nations. This speech was made by Traficant in 1993 and is referencing what took place on the floor of the House March the 9th, 1933. And Noble Drew Ali gave this information to you to present you a defense against and remedy against this corruption in 1913, and a counter move was logically made because all of these people are high priests. They're Skull and Bones, Knights Templars, Knights of Malta. They know the real history, and they know the people don't. This is why the Moorish Divine and National Movement was established for the redemption of our people in northwestern Mexam, central Mexam, southwestern Mexam, and the adjoining islands, i.e. the inherited estate of the descendants of the Moors, etc., etc. And then I'm going to go to chapter 29, 28 of the Holy Instruction of the Prophet from the Circle 7 Quran. And I'm just going to read that particular chapter and absorb it. Then after I read that, I'm going to go and also read chapter 47. And this is chapter 28, Holy Instructions from the Prophet, Master and Servant. Repine not, O man, at the state of servitude. It is the appointment of Allah, and has many advantages. It removes thee from the cares and solicitudes of life. And the honor of a servant is his fidelity. The highest virtues are submission and obedience. And be patient, therefore, under reproofs of thy master. And when he rebuketh thee, answer not again. The silence of thy resignation shall not be forgotten. And be studious of thy interest. Be diligent in his affairs, and faithful to the trust which he reposeth in thee. Thy time and thy labor belong unto him. Defraud him not thereof, for he payeth thee. And thou art a master, and be just to thy servant, if thou expectest from him fidelity, and reasonable in thy commands, if thou expectest ready obedience. And the spirit of man is in him. Severity and rigor may create fear, but cannot command love. And mix kindness with reproof, and reason with authority. And so shall thy admonitions take place in his heart, and his duty shall become his pleasure. And he shall serve thee faithfully from the motive of gratitude, and he shall obey thee cheerfully from the principle of love, and fail thou not in return to give him diligence and fidelity their proper reward. And then we're going to read chapter 29. Magistrate and subject. O thou, the favorite of heaven, whom the sons of men, thy equals, have agreed to raise to sovereign power, and set as ruler over themselves, consider the ends and importance of their trust, far more than the dignity and height of thy station. And thou art clothed in purple, and seated on a throne, and the crown of majesty invested thy temples. The scepter of power is placed in thy hand, but not for thyself were these ensigns given, and not meant for thine own, but for the good of thy kingdom. And the glory of a king is the welfare of his people. His power and dominion rest on their hearts, on the hearts of his subjects. And the mind of a great prince is exalted with the grandeur of his situation, and he evolveth high things, and searches for business worthy of his power. And he calleth together the wise men of his kingdom, and he consulteth among them with freedom, and heareth the opinion of them all. He looketh among his people with discernment, and he discovereth the abilities of men, and employeth them according to their merits. And his magistrates are just. Ministers are wise, and the favorite of his bosom deceiveth him not. And he smileth on the arts, and they flourish. And the sciences improve beneath the culture of his hand. And with the learned and ingenious he delighteth himself. He kindleth in their breast emulation, and the glory of his kingdom is exalted by their labors. And the spirit of the merchant who extendeth his commerce, the skill of the farmer who enricheth his lands, the ingenuity of the artist, the improvement of the scholar, all these he honoreth with his favor, and rewardeth with his bounty. He planteth new colonies, he buildeth strong ships, he openeth rivers for the convenience, he formeth harbors for safety. His people abound in riches, and the strength of his kingdom increaseth. He frameth his statutes with equity and wisdom. His subjects enjoy the fruits of their labor in security, and their happiness consists of the observance of the law. And he foundeth his judgments on the principle of mercy. But in the punishment of offenders he is strict and impartial. His ears are open to the complaints of his subjects. He restraineth his hands to their oppressors, and he delivereth them from their tyranny. His people therefore look up to him as a father with reverence and love, and they consider him as a guardian of all they enjoy. And their affection unto him begetteth his breast a love in his breast, a love of the public, and the security of their happiness is the subject of his care. And no murmurs against him arise in their hearts. The machinations of his enemies endanger not the state. And his subjects are faithful and firm in his cause. And they stand at his defense as a wall of brass. And the army of a tyrant flieth before them, as chaff before the wind. And security and peace bless the dwelling of his people. And the glory and strength encircle their throne forever. And I'm also going to read chapter 47. Give me also, I want Rahm Emanuel's proclamation. Now this is chapter 47 of the Holy Quran, circle 7. Egypt, the capital empire of the dominion of Africa. I'm only going to read 7 verses so that we can stay clear and stay on point. The inhabitants of Africa are the descendants of the ancient Canaanites from the land of Canaan. Old man Cush and his family are the first inhabitants of Africa who came to the land of Canaan. His father Ham and his family were second. Then came the word Ethiopia, which means the demarcation line of the dominion of Anexum, the first true and divine name of Africa, the dividing of the land between the father and the son. The dominion of Cush, northeast and southeast Africa, and northwest and southwest was his father's dominion of Africa. In later years, many of their brethren from Asia and the Holy Lands joined them. The Moabites from the land of Moab, who received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle and inhabit northwest Africa, they were the founders and are the true possessors of the present Moroccan Empire, with their Canaanite, Hittite, and Amorite brethren who sojourned from the land of Canaan seeking new homes. Their dominion and inhabitation extended from northeast and southwest Africa across the great Atlantis, even unto the present North, South, and Central America, and also Mexico and the Atlantis Islands before the great earthquake which caused Great Atlantic Ocean. Now, that's from the Holy Quran. Now I'm going to read a proclamation which is duplicitous of many proclamations that have been issued recently across the United States from different states and from different territories and from different cities and mayors, etc., of the different cities. And this particular one is issued by a Jewish man called Rahm Emanuel, who used to be chief of staff for Obama. And he ran for mayor of Chicago in 2010 and won that office. And this is a proclamation coming from the city of Chicago under the Jewish mayor, Rahm Emanuel, and it is dated the 22nd day of December 2011. Rahm Emanuel Mayor proclamation. Whereas the Moorish Americans are the descendants of the ancient Moabites, Hamathites, and Canaanites, who were permitted by the old pharaohs of Kemet to traverse from East Africa and later form themselves kingdoms extending on the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa, the Atlantic Islands, onto the present-day continental Americas, and whereas the indigenous Moorish peoples of the Americas are now united in order to again link themselves with the family of nations, and whereas the Moorish Americans, being aboriginal to the territories of North, Central, and South America, have formed a sovereign theocratic government guided by the command principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, through virtue of the universal right of self-determination, as well as with the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People guaranteed in the Charter, and whereas on January the 8th, 1886, Noble Drew Ali was born in the state of North Carolina, destined to become the first patriarch of his mentally enslaved Moorish American people, In 1912, he was later anointed Il-Hajj Sharif Ali by the heads of Egypt and holy city of Mecca to return to the United States as the last prophet and founding father of the newly risen nation of Moorish Americans. And as a result of the 13th Amendment, Moorish people were emancipated from slavery in 1865. Now, therefore, I, Rahm Emanuel, Mayor of the City of Chicago, do hereby proclaim January the 8th to the 15th, 2012 to be Moorish American Week in Chicago, and urge all residents to recognize the events planned for this time, dated this 22nd day of December 2011, signed with blue ink, Rahm Emanuel, Mayor. Now, if you'll notice that proclamation, though worded differently in principle, gives the history of the great Super De Beer, which means they know too.
Yeah.
Now, proclamation, as well as the declaration of the inherited right of the Moors as expressed here, it says the dominion of Kush, right? Northeast and Southeast Africa, Northwest and Southwest Africa was his father's dominion of Africa. And so the Moabites on the land of Moab, who received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle and inhabit Northwest Africa, they were the founders and are the true possessors of the present Moroccan Empire. Now, the question goes out. Can some subordinated corporation franchised under a corporate state operating in North America have superior jurisdiction to that?
No.
Then are we worried about that if we don't get some paper from Switzerland or anything where else that we're not legitimately the heirs?
No. No.
We are finished now.
Yeah.
Big time.
Islam.
Islam.
Yeah. Islam.
Islam.
And brother, we have about 10 minutes left, so you can just continue on that thought, and then we'll have a couple questions.
Well, but I read that also from Rahm Emanuel, which is a Jew, which shows you that they know the history.
Yeah.
Islam.
You notice that even when they did the Federal Reserve thing, 1913, they did it right at the same time after Noble Raleigh founded the old Canaanite temple. Do you see the counter move politically?
Islam.
Also, if you recognize that when on the same floor of the Congress, when they did Resolution 75, recognizing the Moors' right to use their titles, etc., which was in April of 1933, about the 17th and the 19th of 1933, that was right a month after what Tropicant is talking about on the floor of representatives, which is March the 9th, 1933. Do you see the correlation of the time period?
Islam.
Islam.
So you see, whenever everything concerned the Moorish movement, there were counter moves made, wasn't there?
Islam, yes.
Also recognize this, that is the obligation of the Moors themselves to do what?
Be themselves.
To save the nation, they must do what? Enforce the law. Isn't that right there in the divine warning to the nation?
Yeah.
Islam.
All right, and what you recognize when people have a background on world history, on real politics, and check world history and government documents, they can see the absolute correlation, so they don't have to believe anything. Are we clear?
Islam.
And these people are Moors, and as when they brand black or they use those words, which that makes them incompetent and listed in law as minority, which means social political condition. And those who don't know language thinks it means numbers when it means social position.
Islam.
Which a minor cannot receive in a state, can they?
No.
And quit.
I just want to ask, the letter that he.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Read.
The letter that he read, you guys, y'all were aware of that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we have many copies.
Yeah, but there's 10 of them. And
Yeah,
that's now.
Oh, we only have 9.
Yeah, and then you may be aware of the one that, Fayetteville, North Carolina, they were trying to retract it.
Yeah.
Right, and we're not really concerned about whether, that's agitation and resistance, whether they retract it, because first of all, they're in line with Article 4, Section 1, or Article 1, Section 4. which is faith and credit to given to all states in their proclamation. But I wanted to say this because I hear, we talk about emotions, and emotion is energy in motion. And a lot of times, what we're going to get now is agitation.
Yes.
Agitation. Oh yeah. And resistance.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that any person that's presently in that room or that you may encounter in the future, the rising of the Moorish consciousness, that doesn't mean that that they have any bad intent per se. But it does mean that they're going to come with some resistance themselves because of what they're used to.
It represents change.
Exactly. The most important, and that same change works the same way for Moors, who, most importantly, what we have to really know is that we were never, ever, 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 ever slaves. But we were enslaved. And it was done, bureaucratically and with papers and things like that.
That's what the 14th Amendment was created for.
And all of the miseducation. So what I would say is that, again, that agitation comes up, and that resistance for everyone, including some Moors, because the lack of education is proof enough by lying to the people in terms of educating them. So what I would say to the Moors is, like Dorothy, click your heels 3 times. You are already home. And important to that is the questionnaire number 16, where it said, how did Prophet Noble Ali begin to uplift the Moorish Americans? By teaching them to be themselves. So we look at that number 16, which is a 7, which is order. And it's not just that he began teaching them, but that we all not only accept that teaching, but that we begin to be ourselves. And when we begin to be ourselves, what happens is, and get the history straight, what happens is it shows who the European is not and who the European is. And so it becomes an agitation and a resistance that's almost kind of understandable whether the person has the intent to be resistant or not. It's just that they also have to be educated again as well, and they don't want to lose that position. Well, it's fake, it's false. All falsehood is colliding with truth right now, and it just will not and cannot stand. So it's not personal, it's not really emotional, other than it is energy and motion, but they might want to...
They've gotten comfortable with the sovereign seat of dealing with the wealth, and it has spoiled them, just like our people have got comfortable feeling inferior, not knowing that they're really the heirs of the estate. And so world politics is changing. The economies that's built on the fraud are collapsing, and people are trying to maintain, i.e. the corruption of the church, of the bishopric established under Pope Innocent, with the theft of the resources of the natural people of the world, and the things is falling apart, and that's all that's in place.
Yeah.
And thus the heirs of the state must be made conscious of who they are, their proper place, and toward the rules and the principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, so that we come back into our rightful place, absent of bitterness. Are we clear?
Islam.
And that we do unto others as we have them do unto us. However, the fact of the matter is, you don't have to be taking some backseat to nobody, do you?
No.
Islam.
All right. Are we clear?
Islam.
Any other questions?
Yeah, one question.
Also, we want to make sure these things and the speech, etc., is available to you on the site. It's on the site already. Go get it. Analyze it, break it down, and have classes with yourselves on it, and it becomes quite obvious that everybody knew this all the time.
Peace, Taj.
Peace.
The Moors, having created, taught, and uplifted the Europeans out of their ignorance in Europe.
And that's called the Renaissance.
Right. Do you view this mainly counterproductive or a productive thing in relation to Moorish identity and government in modern times?
It's productive, because that's the foundation of why this thing even held together at all. And this is and those Europeans who accepted the teaching are called both Aryans and called Renaissance men. And Aryan does not mean the misrepresentation that is often thrown around as some kind of bloodline of European skinheads, etc. Aryan means those who studied the gate of the East, which is the culture of the quadragesimus principle of the circle 7 logos principle of civilization and the science of word, etc., which is the foundation of religion. And those high priests are first called Aryans, and that's come from Germany. Are we clear?
Yes.
And that is Aries, the sign of Aries, or the Lamb of God, or what you call a ram. And logically, from the philosophical culture that's adopted from ancient Hindustan that they call today India, which it is not, it's Hindustan, and the Persians come the foundation of the Christ order, etc., or what is known as the Christ degree, from which the high priests have adopted what they call the Christian religion, absent of Christian dogma that's given to the masses, and which is actually Gnosticism, which is also maintained amongst the priesthood in Islam, maintained amongst the priesthood, the rabbis, in the synagogues, etc., meaning that all the high priests are Gnostics, which means the highest wisdom, or what is known universally as the supreme wisdom, or I, self-law and master, Islam. And this is why you see people that belong to those different religions in secret are Masons and wear the Moorish fez, because they're all Gnostics. And if you understand that, you understand how it has benefited the world, even though we're still in confusion and fighting each other because we've adopted dogma. And remember, one of the major problems of the world, and it's with Moors and others too, is that they've been identifying themselves by belief dogma and not by their sanguineous relationship. In other words, their beliefs, which have been created by men, have become their identity by will of social order, having nothing to do with true divine understanding. And thus dogma must die for humanity to live, and truth of religion must be taught. And this is also part of the difficulty that all of us have getting this information across, because people think that when you tell the truth that you're projecting prejudices when you're actually telling the truth and dissolving the prejudices.
Thank you.
All right.
Yo, let's do our thanks and close out, yo.
You know we don't see you in the camera anymore.
All right, we're gonna turn on the light now.
Ah,
Rezo,
That's all right.
you see Rezo on there? Can we get that? Ah, sweet.
Put on
Okay,
the
once
cam.
again, many thanks.
Put on the cameo.
Yeah.
And remember, yes, and keep this in mind. Keep this in mind. This is another reason why when we present this information, that we always give people history and law, so they don't get caught up in their own and other people's biases in presenting this information. Are we clear? And this is another reason why it is important for Moors, when they begin to get this information, to come humble and not with arrogance. Because like the brother was saying earlier, you know, we're not to assume that we're taking some superior, arrogant, pseudo-racist position, because that whole foundation is a fraud. Absolutely a fraud. Race is the species. And the species of the human family is divided into extended family called nations. Never the fact, and that's regardless of the fact that there's been some hybriding going on.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, we're still of one human family, aren't we?
Islam.
Islam.
Because we're the mothers and fathers of civilization, aren't we?
Islam.
And what is the issue? Even some people who don't understand this, when you do the research in European history, even when the Pope came over here, he has the tapestry hanging across the building, and even has the King of Freising posted on it, who's a Moor. So the real problem is our people.
Right.
We're the ones that ain't convinced.
Islam.
Islam.
You see the point? And even though the fact that we have, and because remember that the battles that we have with the European is their desire for world conquest, has nothing to do with complexion, all that kind of stupid stuff.
Yeah. Islam.
Are we clear?
Islam.
Because they're claiming lands and resources that don't belong to them. Are we clear?
Islam. Yeah.
And then the Pope's war machine is used to wage war on nations around the earth to fulfill that world conquest, as expressed through the bulla coming from the church in 1492 called the Pontifex, and the other bulla coming from the church 1493 called Intercatera Divina, all coming from the secret Treaty of Verona for world conquest and world genocide. That is where we are at odds. Are we clear?
Islam.
All right.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
That's it.
Yeah.
All right, good brother.
One question,
Oh,
one question,
One
please.
question,
Please,
one
before you go. I want to thank you on behalf of us, and we want to invite you here to break bread with us at some
Right,
point.
good brother.
Break bread with us at some point in the future and touch your garments. But the big question here is this. Quoting Noble Drew Ali, we need money, we need more money, and we need it now. There has been in the past some issues about money. What advice would you give to us now as we go forward to make sure that we learn from these mistakes about money?
Yes, now, this is the reason why when Drew Ali set up the Canaanite temple, it was structured also with business, and they had business meetings, and everything must be accounted for. And this is also why that letter was read, because a lot of the people that were controlling the finance were not accounting for the finance, because it's building a nation, and everything must be accounted for. Are we clear? Then we must also recognize when Noble Drew Ali was on the scene, you actually had money. When he left the scene, it was 1929. He was operating under what is called allodial and common law. Then, 3 years later, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33. 4 years later, after his demise, the popes of Rome took over and established what? The democracy order, in order to put the country into debt and to break it, carrying out the mission that was established actually hundreds of years ago. Therefore, people must know the real history so they can protect their profit and their movement. You see the point? Because it's their birthright. It's your birthright.
Islam.
Islam. Just one quick thing I just thought of. We get advice from Moors, different Moors sometimes, and they express the concept that we're supposedly in another country, but we know that it's all one landmass and we're all Moors all over.
Not just that, when you read the Super Devere, when you just read the proclamation even from Rahm Emanuel,
Yes,
you know how, look at this. People are talking about the history and talking about being Moors and don't even know the geographical outline of their own empire, which makes them in law incompetent.
Islam.
Their written is irrelevant.
Islam.
No, and it doesn't put down any work that they're doing, but this is why the people must be taught. Or people that don't even know geography are declared incompetent.
Islam.
Someone going to use the sovereign authority of a nation to which these people have treaty. And they acknowledge when these people who are the heirs won't even acknowledge because they keep on making up stuff because they want to have club systems that they created thinking that they're reverse church. You understand? In other words, these are not belief degrees. Our people deal with beliefs too much. They're used to beliefs. They need to deal with real politics.
No way.
Islam, no brother.
Islam. Islam, brother.
Can you clear up the difference or the similarities between the United States of America Republic and the Moroccan Empire?
Oh,
The Moroccan Empire, listen, all right, let me make it most clear. And you can read between the lines. I'll read a letter from George Washington to the Sultan, all right?
Okay.
That would give most people, even youth, a kind of concept, because remember it was written at a time when the social engineering that takes place today was not as strong. Even though you would have the resolution, or what you call the revolution, I will read the letter from George Washington. Yes.
what you need to keep in mind is this. The United States of America was formed, we the nation state, right? Was formed the nation state that says we the people of the United States, which is all of it. Then created the adopted the Constitution for who? For the United States of America. So distinct.
Two different entities.
So what that really was the naturalization of the Europeans was the Constitution.
Now that's
and you
why
can't be a member of the
that's
USA.
why Europeans, those who are in positions of power, must be Masons and wear the Moorish fez. That's why if anybody, I'm going to post some pictures from George Washington's Masonic Lodge in Alexandria, Virginia, for the people in Canaanland
Yeah.
to see Europeans
Yeah.
wearing Europeans with Eel
Yeah.
and Bay on it.
Yeah, we saw those pictures, Taj.
I
Oh, let them
but
show
I'm
it.
just
Let them
saying,
put more.
we need to understand that
Yeah, let
while
them
they
put
may
more.
be
Let them put
Christians
the whole
on the
word.
public arena, they know that they're in the Moorish dominions.
Oh, yeah.
You see, the confusion comes with the heirs, because we remember one of the things that keeps our people mentally enslaved is that they've been trained with belief systems,
Yeah, believe.
which change every 2 years. The real world doesn't run on that. They don't know that that's opiate for the masses, because they think that belief, remember I told you about the 3 lights, most of the masses, they're on the belief degree. They don't even know that the belief degree is neophyte,
Yeah.
because the leaders don't tell them.
Right.
And the others are on the faith degree. They don't even know the faith degree is scholar. And all the imams, the rabbis, the grand chiefs get a fruition degree, which is the masters. That's when they become adept, which means expert. Do you understand? And they themselves are the demons that have put the world in darkness. Not just the Europeans, like the brother was saying. It was these grand chiefs. This is why a lot of them grand chiefs won't carry out Noble Drew Ali's rule. This is the reason why they shut down his newspaper. When he told the Moors that it was the most powerful weapon in the hand of our group today, them grand chiefs sell out. First thing they did is shut down that paper so these communications would not take place across the country. You understand? To put the world in darkness. Now, as I read George Washington's letter, and we also have it on the site, make sure that everybody listens and analyzes this, do a critical analysis and read between the lines. Because remember, this is in the 1700s. But here's the letter, and it's in George Washington's documents. It's in documents on American history, but it's not in the school books. All right? Documents of American history, George Washington, and he's wearing his Masonic barb with isonymy on his apron, etc. Letter from George Washington to Muhammad ibn Abd, City of New York, December the 1st, 1789. Great and magnanimous friend, since the date of the letter which the late Congress from their president addressed your Imperial Majesty, the United States of America have thought proper to change their government and institute a new one agreeable to the Constitution, of which I have the honor herewith to enclose a copy. And the time necessarily employed in the arduous task and the disarrangement occasioned by so great, though peaceable, a revolution, will apologize and account for your majesty's not having received those regularly advised marks of attention from the United States, which the friendship and magnanimity of your conduct toward them afforded reason to expect. The United States having unanimously appointed me to supreme executive authority in this nation, your majesty's letter of August the 17th, 1788, which by reason of the dissolution of the late government remained unanswered and has been delivered to me. And I have also received the letter which your Imperial Majesty has been so kind as to write in favor of the United States to the Bashars of Tunis and Tripoli, and I present to you the sincere acknowledgments and thanks of the United States for this important mark of your friendship for them. We greatly regret the hostile disposition of those regencies toward this nation, who have never injured them, is not to be removed on terms of our power to comply with. And within our territories, there are no mines whether of gold or silver, and this young man just recovering from the waste and dissolution of a long war have not as yet had time to acquire riches by agriculture and commerce. But our soil is bountiful and our people industrious, and we have reason to flatter ourselves that we shall gradually become useful to our friends. And the encouragement with your majesty has been pleased generously to give to our commerce with your commitments the punctuality with which you have caused the treaty with us to be observed, and the just and generous measures taken in the case of Captain Parker, make a deep impression on the United States and confirm their respect for and their attack to and to give people you have the opportunity, during your majesty, that while I remain at the head of this nation, I shall not cease to promote every measure that may conduce to the friendship and harmony which so happily subsist between your empire and them, and shall esteem myself happy in every occasion of convincing your majesty of the high sense which in common with the whole nation I entertain the magnanimity, wisdom, and benevolence of your majesty. And may the Almighty bless your Imperial Majesty, our great and magnanimous friend, with his constant guidance and protection. Signed, George Washington. Are we clear to the political connection and operations on the Moorish dominions?
Islam.
Islam. We are Islam.
And as you can see, they had a problem keeping up with the taxes.
Islam.
All right. And as you recognize, even by his own words, he is not, could not, and never was the first president.
Islam.
Islam. Never was.
But yet he's taught in history as being the first president, isn't it? As presented to the masses.
Yes, Islam.
So now you understand that the Moors got a higher degree of information, and that's why it causes confusion with people who don't know.
Yes, Islam.
Therefore, it's important for us not to talk opinion, but to give the facts and make it available to the people, just like you said, good brother, deliver it into their hands.
Islam.
Islam.
All right, good brother.
All right.
And one last thing too that I meant to mention, that someone had mentioned earlier, that, you know, if the mental slavery was over, we wouldn't be doing what we were doing. That's not true at all, because from the time that Prophet Noah came, he said the mental slavery.
He said, I came to redeem you from the mental slavery which you have now.
And it takes a while, as you can see, with the agitation and the resistance, even upon ourselves, to accept this, because we've been indoctrinated, brainwashed, and everything else.
In other words, it becomes more apparent, even though they've done a lot of book burns, there's enough available information that'll wake anybody up, if they're sincere. And the only way that people can't be honestly waking up as if they have some kind of other negative agenda of wanting to sell our people something.